I'm Audrey Mitchell, 34, staring at my phone in disbelief. The group text from Mom glows mockingly. We're doing Mother's Day with just the well-behaved kids this year. You can skip this one, Audrey. My chest tightens as familiar pain surfaces. But then something unexpected happens. Instead of tears, I feel my lips curve into a smile. After 34 years of being the family scapegoat, I finally had concrete proof of my mother's favoritism, and this time, I wasn't going to just take it. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family. Trust me, after hearing my story, you'll never look at family dynamics the same way again. Growing up in our pristine colonial home in Westport, Connecticut, we looked like the perfect American family. My mother, Patricia, now 62, maintained an immaculate house and reputation to match. My father, Richard, 64, built a successful accounting firm but remained emotionally distant, especially when it came to family conflicts. My older sister, Heather, 37, was the golden child from day one, beautiful, compliant, and eager to please. My younger brother, Kyle, 30, was the baby of the family, coddled and protected from consequences his entire life. Then there was me, perpetually stuck in the middle and somehow always wrong. The pattern started early. When I was 7, I won first prize in the school art contest. My painting hung in the town library for a month. My parents never went to see it, claiming they were too busy. That same year, they canceled a business trip to attend Heather's ballet recital, where she was merely part of the ensemble. I remember sitting alone in the library after school, staring at my painting, trying to understand why it wasn't important enough. By 3rd grade, I'd learned that achievements wouldn't win my mother's approval. When I brought home straight, as Patricia would glance at my report card and ask, "Did you talk too much in class again?" Meanwhile, Heather's B- grades were celebrated with ice cream outings because she tried her best. Kyle could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. When he broke my science project the night before it was due, Patricia told me, "You shouldn't have left it where he could reach it." I stayed up all night recreating my work while Kyle faced no consequences. This became our family's unspoken rule. Kyle's actions were always forgivable. Mine never were. My father, Richard, witnessed it all from behind his newspaper or computer screen. Occasionally, he'd mutter, "Patricia, that's not fair to Audrey," but he never truly intervened. His conflict avoidance taught me another painful lesson. Even people who recognized the injustice wouldn't stand up for me. In high school, I threw myself into academics and art, hoping excellence might finally earn recognition. When I received a full scholarship to Rhode Island School of Design, my mother's response cut deep. "Art school? Well, I suppose that's better than nothing." Heather's acceptance to a state college with partial scholarship prompted a celebration dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. After college, I built a successful career as a graphic designer in Boston, far enough from Connecticut to breathe, but close enough to maintain family ties. Every achievement in my adult life, promotions, awards, my downtown condo purchase, was met with my mother's thinly veiled criticism. "Graphic design seems unstable." "Heather's nursing job has such good benefits." Or, "That neighborhood seems unsafe. Are you sure you can afford something better?" Still, I persisted in seeking my mother's approval. Every birthday, Christmas, and, yes, Mother's Day, I selected thoughtful gifts and penned heartfelt cards. Last Mother's Day, I spent half my monthly discretionary budget on a sterling silver bracelet engraved with all our birthstones. Patricia wore it once, then put it away for safekeeping. I later spotted it in Heather's jewelry box when helping her move. Family gatherings became exercises in emotional endurance. Patricia would critique everything from my haircut to my career choices, often in the guise of helpful suggestions. "Audrey, that dress makes you look washed out," or "Have you considered a more stable career path?" Each comment delivered with a smile that dared me to object and risk being labeled too sensitive. Despite recognizing the pattern, I continued showing up, playing my assigned role in our family's dysfunctional script. Something in me still believed that if I just tried hard enough, was good enough, patient enough, Someday I would finally earn the maternal love that seemed to flow so effortlessly to my siblings. That's what made this Mother's Day text different. It wasn't a subtle jab or backhanded compliment. It was explicit rejection. For once, my mother had put into words what her actions had always implied. I wasn't good enough to be included in the family. And strangely, that text message would become the catalyst for my freedom. Tuesday morning at the design agency where I work started like any other. I was reviewing client feedback on a branding project when my phone buzzed with a group text. Seeing it was from my mother, I felt the usual mix of hope and dread before opening it. The message was addressed to my father, Heather, Kyle, and me. Planning Mother's Day brunch at Westport Country Club this year. We're doing Mother's Day with just the well-behaved kids this year. You can skip this one, Audrey. Heather, please bring those scones everyone loved last time. Kyle, Dad will pick you up at 10:30. I read it 3 times, each time hoping the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less hurtful. They didn't. My mother had casually excluded me from a family holiday while simultaneously labeling me as the not well-behaved child at 34 years old. The responses came quickly. Kyle sent a thumbs-up emoji. Heather wrote, "Can't wait. I'll bring the scones and that strawberry jam from the farmer's market." My father, predictably, didn't respond at all. Not one of them acknowledged or questioned my exclusion. I set my phone face down on my desk, hands shaking slightly. The design on my computer screen blurred as tears threatened, but I blinked them back. My coworker Jamie glanced over with concern, but I managed a tight smile and turned back to my monitor. This wasn't the first hurtful Mother's Day. Last year, I'd spent weeks searching for the perfect gift. The sterling silver birthstone bracelet that cost nearly a week's salary. I'd wrapped it beautifully and included a heartfelt card expressing my gratitude for everything she'd taught me. When she opened it, Patricia had given it a cursory glance and said, "Silver? I usually wear gold, Audrey. But it's nice." Then she'd moved on to gush over Heather's gift, a store-bought cake and a mass-produced card. The year before that, I'd flown home specially for the weekend, despite a major project deadline. Patricia had spent the entire brunch criticizing my haircut, asking when I planned to settle down with someone decent, and comparing my modest apartment to Heather's suburban house that our parents had helped finance with a generous down payment. Each year, I tried harder. Each year, the rejection cut deeper. My phone rang, pulling me from the memory spiral. It was my friend Rachel, calling about our weekend plans. Hearing my voice, she immediately knew something was wrong. "Audrey, what happened? You sound terrible." I stepped outside to take the call, and the story spilled out, not just the text, but years of being the family scapegoat. Rachel listened without interruption, then said something that stopped me cold. "Audrey, that's emotional abuse. What your mother's doing, it's not normal, and it's not your fault." "Abuse?" I repeated, the word feeling foreign and dramatic. "Isn't that a bit extreme?" "She's just difficult. Systematically singling out one child for criticism while praising the others? Explicitly excluding you from family gatherings? That goes beyond difficult," Rachel said firmly. "Have you ever considered talking to someone about this, like a therapist?" I brushed off her suggestion. Therapy seemed like an overreaction to a family squabble. Besides, admitting I needed help would just confirm what Patricia always implied, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. That night in my apartment, I found myself scrolling through old family photos on my laptop. A pattern emerged that I'd never noticed before. In nearly every picture, I was positioned at the edge of the group, while Heather and Kyle were centered near our parents. In some, I was partially cropped out. In others, Patricia was looking at my siblings while I smiled at the camera alone. One photo from my high school graduation stopped me short. While everyone else was smiling broadly, Patricia's expression as she looked at me was unmistakable, a mixture of disappointment and resentment. How had I never seen it before? I closed the laptop, my mind racing. For the first time, I considered the possibility that the problem wasn't me failing to be good enough, but a pattern established long before I could have influenced it. The thought was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Instead of responding to the group text, I turned off my phone and took a long shower, letting hot water wash away the tears I'd held back all day. When I emerged, a strange calm had settled over me. This time would be different. This time, I wouldn't beg for inclusion or pretend the exclusion didn't hurt. This time, I would take a step back and observe the family dynamic with clear eyes. That night, I made two decisions that would change everything. I wouldn't respond to the text at all, and I would take Rachel's advice about therapy. If nothing else, I needed an objective perspective on whether my family situation was indeed as dysfunctional as it suddenly seemed. Finding Dr. Samantha Barnes was a stroke of luck, or perhaps the universe's way of stepping in when I was finally ready to see the truth. Her office was warm but minimalist, with plants thriving in every corner and soft lighting that made her credentials on the wall less intimidating. "So, Audrey," she said after I'd completed the intake paperwork, "what brings you here today?" I'd rehearsed an articulate explanation, but what came out instead was, "My mother uninvited me from Mother's Day because I'm not well-behaved enough." The absurdity of it made me laugh nervously. Dr. Barnes didn't laugh. She didn't look shocked either. She simply nodded and asked, "Has there been a pattern of your mother treating you differently from your siblings?" Something about her matter-of-fact tone broke through my defenses. For the next 40 minutes, I shared snippets of my family history, the constant criticism, the double standards, the futile attempts to earn approval. Dr. Barnes listened intently, occasionally jotting notes but mostly maintaining eye contact that felt supportive without being intrusive. "What you're describing sounds like a family dynamic where you've been cast in the role of the scapegoat," she said when I finally ran out of words. "Scapegoat?" I repeated. "That sounds so biblical." "It's actually a common term in family systems theory," she explained. "In dysfunctional families, particularly those with narcissistic patterns, one child is often designated as the problem, while others are idealized. The scapegoat typically shows more independence or resistance to control. "But I've always tried to please my mother," I protested. "And yet you also pursued your own path. Art school instead of a more traditional route, a creative career, living independently in the city. These might seem like normal adult choices to most people, but to a controlling parent, they can represent threat." I considered this. "So you're saying my mother resents me for being myself?" "I'm suggesting that your mother's treatment of you may have very little to do with your actual behavior and much more to do with what you represent in the family system." I pulled out my phone. "Can I show you something?" I pulled up the Mother's Day text and handed it to her. Dr. Barnes read it, her expression remaining neutral. "How did you feel when you received this?" "Hurt, angry, confused." I paused. And then, relieved. Somehow. Like finally having proof I wasn't imagining things. "That's significant," she nodded. "Many people in your situation gaslight themselves for years, questioning their own perceptions because no one else acknowledges the dynamic. My friend Rachel called it emotional abuse," I said quietly, still uncomfortable with the term. Dr. Barnes handed back my phone. "Would you use that term if a friend showed you this text from their mother?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Of course I would. If Rachel or any other friend had shown me such a blatantly hurtful message, I would have been outraged on their behalf. Why was I so quick to make excuses for my mother's behavior toward me? "I think I've spent my whole life trying to fix myself," I admitted. "If I could just figure out what was wrong with me and correct it, then my mother would love me properly." "That's a heavy burden for a child to carry into adulthood," Dr. Barnes said gently. "What if there was nothing to fix? What if you were always worthy of love and acceptance just as you are?" The idea was so foreign that my eyes welled up. "Then why?" I couldn't finish the question. "Why couldn't your mother see that?" "That's something we can explore over time. But it may have nothing to do with you and everything to do with her own limitations." We spent the rest of the session discussing healthy boundaries versus retaliation. I admitted my fantasy of responding to the text with all the hurt and anger I felt, of finally telling my family exactly how their treatment had affected me. "There's a difference between setting boundaries and seeking revenge," Dr. Barnes cautioned. "One is about protecting yourself. The other keeps you engaged in the toxic dynamic. What if setting boundaries means losing my family entirely? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. That's a real possibility we should acknowledge, she replied honestly. But I'd ask you to consider what you're actually losing versus what you hope might someday change. For homework, Dr. Barnes suggested I start a journal documenting specific incidents that had caused pain, both past and present. Write them down as objectively as possible, she advised. It's not about vilifying your family, but about validating your own experience. I left the session feeling drained but somehow lighter. For the first time, I had permission to trust my own perceptions, without questioning whether I was being too sensitive or making things up. Accusations I'd heard from my mother throughout my life. That evening, I started the journal, beginning with the Mother's Day text. As I wrote, a concept Dr. Barnes had mentioned kept resurfacing in my mind. Detached observation. Instead of reacting emotionally to my family's behavior, what if I simply observed it with curiosity, as if studying an interesting social phenomenon? The idea was strangely appealing. After decades of emotional entanglement, the prospect of stepping back felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. I didn't need to fix my family or myself. I just needed to see the reality clearly and decide how to respond from a place of self-respect rather than desperation for approval. Little did I know how soon this new approach would be tested. The call from my cousin Megan came exactly 8 days after my first therapy session. I hadn't spoken to her in months, so seeing her name on my caller ID was surprising. Audrey? Hey. This is awkward, but are you okay? Like, really okay? Her voice had that forced casualness that immediately put me on alert. I'm fine. Why do you ask? A pause. It's just. Aunt Patricia mentioned you were going through some stuff. She seemed really worried. My stomach tightened. What kind of stuff did she mention? Another pause. Longer this time. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of family drama, but she told everyone at Grandma's birthday last weekend that you've been having problems. With alcohol, maybe pills, and money issues. She said you asked her for a loan because you were behind on rent, but then got angry when she suggested you get help instead. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed this information. None of it was true. Not a single word. I hadn't asked my mother for money in years, not since she'd lorded a small loan over me during college, reminding me of my debt at every opportunity until I'd paid it back with interest. Megan, I don't have addiction issues or money problems. I haven't asked my mother for anything. This is completely fabricated. Oh. She sounded confused. Well, she seemed really concerned. Said that's why you weren't coming to Mother's Day, because you were upset about her refusing to enable your problems. The calculated nature of the lie took my breath away. My mother hadn't just excluded me. She'd created an entire false narrative to justify my absence and paint herself as the concerned parent making tough love choices. Is that why you called? To check if I was in rehab? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. No, I mean, yes, I was concerned. But I should have known it sounded weird. You've always been so put together. She paused. So why aren't you going to Mother's Day then? The question was a trap. If I told Megan the truth, that I'd been explicitly uninvited, I'd sound like I was calling my mother a liar, which would likely get back to Patricia and escalate the situation. If I made up an excuse, I'd be complicit in my own erasure from the family narrative. That's something between my mother and me, I finally said. But I appreciate your concern enough to tell you directly. I don't have addiction or financial problems. I'm doing well professionally and personally. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The scope of the betrayal was still sinking in. My mother hadn't just rejected me. She was actively undermining my reputation within the extended family. With shaking hands, I called Heather. My sister answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. Hey, what's up? I'm about to head into a meeting. Did you know Mom is telling the family I have addiction and money problems? I asked without preamble. A beat of silence. She's just worried about you, Audrey. Worried about problems that don't exist? I don't have addiction issues, Heather. I'm not asking for money. These are lies. You know how Mom exaggerates, Heather said. Her tone dismissive. She probably just misunderstood something you said. Misunderstood what? We haven't even spoken recently, except for that group text where she uninvited me from Mother's Day. Another pause. Look, I don't want to get involved in whatever is happening between you two. Can't you just apologize for whatever it is and move on? That's what I always do. Apologize for what? Being excluded? Having lies spread about me? Heather sighed. I have to go. We'll talk later, okay? She hung up before I could respond. The realization that my sister was actively enabling, even participating in, the gossip campaign hit me harder than my mother's behavior. Heather and I had never been close, but I'd always believed that beneath the favoritism and competition, there was some baseline of sisterly loyalty. Apparently, I was wrong. My phone rang again almost immediately. Dad. With a sense of dread, I answered. Audrey? My father's voice was hesitant. Your mother mentioned you and she are having some difficulties. That's one way to put it, I replied coolly. Did she also mention the addiction and money problems she's invented for me? Now, he said in the placating tone he'd used throughout my childhood whenever conflicts arose. I'm sure there are misunderstandings on both sides. Your mother worries about you, that's all. Dad, she's spreading lies about me to the entire family. This isn't a misunderstanding. Well, he cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maybe if you just apologize to her, we can put this unpleasantness behind us. You know how she gets when she feels disrespected. And there it was, the familiar request to maintain family peace by sacrificing my dignity and accepting blame for something I hadn't done. The same pattern that had played out my entire life. I won't apologize for things I haven't done, I said firmly. And I won't pretend it's okay for her to lie about me. My father sighed heavily. I don't want to be in the middle of this, Audrey. Please, just try to make peace before Mother's Day. After ending the call, I immediately texted Dr. Barnes to request an emergency session. Fortunately, she had a cancellation the following day. In her office, I relayed the events with a strange calm that surprised even me. I feel like I'm watching a movie about someone else's dysfunctional family, I admitted. Is that shock? It could be. Dr. Barnes nodded. Or, it could be the beginning of emotional detachment from toxic patterns. You're starting to observe, rather than just react. My mother is deliberately destroying my reputation in the family, I said. And Heather is backing her up. My father wants me to apologize just to keep the peace. In family systems like yours, we often see what are called flying monkeys. People who, wittingly or unwittingly, do the narcissist's bidding. They help maintain the family mythology, like in The Wizard of Oz, I murmured. The flying monkeys did the Wicked Witch's dirty work. Exactly. Your sister and father are playing that role right now. It's often unconscious. They've learned it's easier to comply than to face the narcissist's wrath themselves. So what do? I asked. How do I defend myself against lies? Document everything, Dr. Barnes advised. Save texts, emails, voicemails. Not to build a case against your family, but to remind yourself of reality when they try to distort it. Maintain your dignity by not engaging in similar tactics. And consider building connections with people who can see the truth. Like who? Are there family members who might be more objective? Friends who've witnessed the dynamic? Focus on relationships that validate rather than gaslight your experiences. That evening, I created a digital folder titled Documentation and began saving screenshots of conversations. I also drafted careful, factual messages to several extended family members I trusted, not explicitly contradicting my mother's stories but simply updating them on my actual life. My recent promotion, my volunteer work, photos of my apartment that clearly wasn't the home of someone with financial problems. The responses were mixed. Some relatives seemed relieved to hear from me directly. Others were politely distant, clearly uncomfortable being caught between conflicting narratives. A few, like my Aunt Jean, responded with warmth and subtle indications that they'd never believed Patricia's stories in the first place. I was building a small circle of truth amid the family mythology. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or vindication, but it was a start. The digital folder labeled Documentation grew steadily over the next 2 weeks. Screenshots of text messages, transcriptions of voicemails, emails, forwarded to my personal account. all preserved with clinical detachment. I wasn't building a case to present to my family. I was creating an anchor to reality when gaslighting threatened to make me doubt my own experiences. On a particularly difficult day, I decided to search old email threads, looking for patterns I might have missed. What I found shocked me. In numerous family-wide emails about gatherings, vacations, and celebrations, I discovered I'd been deliberately excluded from initial communications. I'd only been added to threads after plans were mostly finalized, often with my mother prefacing my inclusion with phrases like, "I suppose we should add Audrey to this discussion," or, "Let's include Audrey now that the details are set." The evidence of systematic exclusion was right there in my inbox, spanning years. How had I never noticed? Digging deeper, I found a folder of old journals I'd kept throughout high school and college. Flipping through pages filled with my younger handwriting, I discovered detailed accounts of incidents I'd almost forgotten. Mom forgot to tell me about the family photo shoot until an hour before. Everyone else had coordinated outfits. When I showed up in the wrong colors, she made me change into Heather's clothes that didn't fit. In the photos, she kept repositioning me at the edge of the group. Got accepted to that summer art program with scholarship. When I told Mom, she said, "That's nice," and immediately changed the subject to Heather's boyfriend troubles. Dad promised to come to my art show opening. No show. When I called, Mom answered and said he was too tired, but they were both at Kyle's baseball game the next morning. Reading these entries was like finding missing puzzle pieces that finally made the picture clear. The pattern hadn't started with the Mother's Day text. It had been consistent throughout my life. I needed to talk to someone who had witnessed this dynamic firsthand. After some deliberation, I called my mother's sister, Aunt Linda, and invited her for coffee. We met at a quiet cafe near her house in the neighboring town. "I was surprised to hear from you," Linda admitted after we exchanged pleasantries. "Patricia mentioned you were going through some difficulties." "Did she mention what kind of difficulties?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Linda looked uncomfortable. "Something about lifestyle choices she was concerned about. Addiction and money problems?" I suggested calmly. Linda's eyes widened slightly, among other things. "None of it is true," I said simply. "I don't have addiction issues. I'm financially stable. I haven't asked my mother for money. I was uninvited from Mother's Day explicitly by text, not choosing to skip it because of any problems. I showed her the text message. Linda read it, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock. "Oh, Audrey," she said softly. I don't even know what to say. I'm trying to understand why this has been the pattern my whole life," I said. "Has Mom always treated me differently?" Linda stirred her coffee for a long moment before answering. "Your mother and I have a complicated relationship, as you know. But yes, I've noticed how differently she treats you compared to your siblings." "Why?" I asked. The question that had haunted me for decades. "Patricia has always been threatened by independence in others. When you were just a little girl, you showed this fierce, creative streak and willingness to do your own thing. Heather was different, always seeking approval, easy to direct. Kyle was the baby, so naturally dependent. But you," she smiled sadly, "you reminded me of your grandfather, talented, self-sufficient, marching to your own drummer. And Mom didn't like that? Patricia has always needed to be the center of the family universe. Anyone who operates independently challenges that setup." Linda reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "It was never about you being deficient, Audrey. If anything, it was about qualities she envied but couldn't control." The validation from someone who had known my mother longer than anyone was powerful. For the first time, I felt the weight of personal failing lift slightly from my shoulders. Emboldened by this conversation, I reached out to my childhood friend Tessa, who had spent countless hours at our house growing up and had witnessed the family dynamic firsthand. We met for dinner the following weekend. "I've been wanting to talk to you about this for years," Tessa confessed after I explained the situation. "Even as kids, I could see how differently your mom treated you. Remember when we both got paint on the basement carpet during that art project? Your mom grounded you for a week but just laughed it off when Heather did much worse with her nail polish experiment. You noticed that?" I was stunned. Audrey, everyone noticed. My mom used to say it wasn't right, but she didn't know how to bring it up without making things awkward. One by one, I reconnected with people who had witnessed pieces of my family history. My college roommate Julia, who had spent a holiday weekend with us and been shocked by my mother's constant criticism. My first boss, Martin, who had overheard a phone call where my mother belittled my career choice and had afterward asked gently if everything was okay at home. Each conversation strengthened my support system and validated my perceptions. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. The treatment I'd endured was objectively problematic, visible even to outside observers. My growing confidence was shaken briefly when Kyle called one evening. Initially, his tone was sympathetic. "Hey sis, just checking in. Things seem pretty intense with Mom right now." Relief washed over me. Finally, an ally from within the immediate family. "Thanks, Kyle. It's been difficult, especially with the lies she's spreading." "Yeah, about that." His voice shifted slightly. "I'm actually recording this conversation for Mom. She's worried about your mental state and wanted documentation." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. "You're recording me? Without telling me?" "Mom said you're spreading lies about her," Kyle said defensively. "She's just trying to protect herself." "By having you secretly record our conversation? How does that make sense to you, Kyle?" "Look, I don't want to be in the middle of this," he said, echoing our father's words. "Mom's upset, and you know how she gets when she's upset." "I do know," I replied quietly. "That's the problem, Kyle. We've all been managing her emotions our entire lives, at the expense of truth and healthy relationships." "That's not fair," he protested. "She's our mother." "Yes, she is. And I love her. But I won't participate in lies and manipulation anymore, even out of love." After ending the call, I added it to my documentation folder with a simple note. Kyle admitted to recording conversation at mother's request, April 28th. In my next therapy session, Dr. Barnes helped me process this latest betrayal. "Your brother's actions hurt, but they're also predictable within this family system," she explained. As the baby who's been protected from consequences, Kyle likely fears becoming the new scapegoat if he doesn't comply with your mother's wishes. So what now? Mother's Day is coming up fast. "What do you want to do about Mother's Day?" Dr. Barnes asked. "Not what you think you should do, but what you genuinely want." I considered the question carefully. I don't want to pretend the exclusion didn't happen. I don't want to force my way into a gathering where I've been explicitly unwelcome. But I also don't want to sit home feeling sorry for myself. Those are all things you don't want. What do you want? The answer came with surprising clarity. I want to reclaim the day in a way that honors genuine maternal energy in my life, not just the relationship with my biological mother. That sounds like a powerful intention, Dr. Barnes nodded. What might that look like in practice? As we explored possibilities, I remembered something I'd nearly forgotten. My maternal grandmother Dorothy, now 84, who had always shown me unconditional love but who had been increasingly sidelined in family gatherings as my mother took control. I haven't seen my grandmother in months, I realized. Mom always arranges family gatherings in ways that make it difficult for her to attend, claiming it's for her convenience but really limiting her influence. Your grandmother might appreciate reconnection as much as you would, Dr. Barnes suggested. That evening, I called Dorothy for the first time in too long. Her voice, still strong despite her age, filled me with warmth. "Audrey, what a lovely surprise. I was just thinking about your beautiful artwork the other day. I still have that watercolor you gave me for my 75th birthday hanging in my sitting room." We chatted for nearly an hour, catching up on each other's lives. When I finally broached the subject of Mother's Day, I did so cautiously. "Grandma, I won't be at the family brunch this year. I was wondering if you might like to spend that day together instead? I could pick you up, and we could do something special." "Oh, darling, I'd love that," Dorothy said, her voice brightening. "To be honest, those country club brunches Patricia arranges are exhausting at my age. Too noisy to have a proper conversation. A quiet day with you sounds much nicer." As I hung up, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. For the first time in years, I was actively choosing how to spend Mother's Day, rather than anxiously trying to meet impossible expectations. That choice would soon trigger the most direct confrontation yet with my mother. With just 10 days until Mother's Day, the pressure from my family began to escalate. It started with a text from my mother that somehow managed to be both passive-aggressive and falsely concerned. "The family will miss you Sunday. Hope you're getting the help you need." After consulting with Dr. Barnes, I crafted a response that was truthful without being inflammatory. "I'm honoring your request to skip this year as stated in your text. I'm well and hope you enjoy your day with Heather and Kyle." No denial of her false narrative about my problems. No emotional plea for inclusion. Just a calm acknowledgement of the reality she had created. It felt strangely empowering to refuse engagement in the drama. The next escalation came from Heather, who called that evening while I was preparing dinner. "Mom's really upset about your text," she began without greeting. "Why are you twisting her words?" "I quoted her directly," I replied, keeping my voice even. "She said the day was for well-behaved kids, and that I should skip this one." "You know she didn't mean it that way," Heather insisted. "She was just frustrated because you've been so distant lately. If you'd just apologize." "For what?" I interrupted. "For being explicitly uninvited. For having lies spread about me to the extended family? What exactly should I apologize for, Heather?" My sister sighed dramatically. "This is why Mom gets so frustrated with you. You always have to make everything so difficult. The rest of us just apologize and move on." "And how's that working out? Are you actually happy with your relationship with Mom? Or have you just gotten used to walking on eggshells and accepting blame for things you haven't done?" There was a long pause before Heather responded, her voice suddenly small. "It's easier this way." "Easier doesn't mean healthier," I said gently. "I'm not trying to create drama. I'm just refusing to participate in patterns that have been harmful to me." "So you're not coming to Mother's Day brunch?" Heather asked, changing tactics. "No. I'm spending the day with Grandma Dorothy instead." "Grandma?" Heather sounded genuinely surprised. "Does Mom know?" "Grandma knows, and she's looking forward to it. That's what matters." After hanging up, I felt oddly serene. For once, I had stated my boundaries clearly without being drawn into emotional reactivity. It was progress, small but significant. The next day, I went shopping for Dorothy's Mother's Day gift. After considering various options, I settled on something deeply meaningful. I would have several old family photos restored and framed, pictures from before my mother's marriage, when Dorothy was the central maternal figure. Images that captured genuine joy and connection, free from the strained performances that characterized our later family photos. I selected half a dozen images from a digital archive my father had created years ago. Dorothy holding my mother as a baby. Dorothy teaching young Patricia to bake. 3 generations of women in the garden of the family's first home. I took them to a specialty shop that did photo restoration and custom framing, splurging on archival quality materials worthy of these precious memories. As Mother's Day approached, I felt increasingly centered in my decision. Instead of the usual anxiety about whether my gift would be good enough or if I could avoid criticism for a full brunch service, I was actually looking forward to a genuine connection with my grandmother. 3 days before Mother's Day, my phone rang with Dorothy's number. "Audrey, dear," she began, her voice uncharacteristically confused. "I've just had the strangest call from your mother. She says you've canceled our plans for Sunday and that I should come to the country club brunch instead. But I was so looking forward to our day together." The calculated sabotage shouldn't have surprised me, yet it still did. My mother had discovered my plans with Dorothy and was actively trying to undermine them. "Grandma, I haven't canceled anything," I assured her. "Our plans are still on. I'll pick you up at 11 on Sunday as we discussed." "Oh." Dorothy sounded relieved but still confused. Patricia was so insistent. She said you'd called her to apologize and would be joining everyone at the club after all. "None of that is true," I said gently. "Mom and I haven't spoken directly in weeks." There was a long pause before Dorothy responded. "Your mother has always had a complex relationship with the truth when it serves her purposes," she said carefully. I remember how she used to pit her sisters against each other with selective information. This glimpse into my mother's childhood behavior patterns was illuminating. The manipulation hadn't started with me. It was a long-established strategy. "I'm sorry you were caught in the middle, Grandma. Don't you worry about me," Dorothy said, her voice strengthening. "I may be old, but I still know my own mind. I'll tell Patricia I've made my plans with you, and that's that." I hung up feeling both angry at my mother's interference and touched by my grandmother's loyalty. For the first time, I was experiencing what it felt like to have a maternal figure choose me, stand up for me, and prioritize our relationship over appeasing my mother. When Mother's Day morning arrived, my phone began buzzing with texts before I'd even finished my coffee. First, from my father. "Your mother is very hurt. You chose not to join the family today. Please reconsider." Then from Kyle. "Mom's crying. Way to ruin the day." Even Heather chimed in. "This childish rebellion is only hurting you in the end." Following Dr. Barnes's advice about maintaining boundaries, I turned off my phone entirely. Whatever drama was unfolding at the country club brunch was not my responsibility to manage. Instead, I focused on creating a beautiful day with Dorothy. I picked her up promptly at 11, bringing a small bouquet of her favorite lilacs from the farmer's market. Her face lit up when she saw the flowers. "Just like the ones that grew outside my childhood home," she exclaimed, burying her nose in the fragrant blooms. I took her to a quiet lakeside restaurant where we could talk without shouting over crowd noise. Over a leisurely meal, Dorothy shared stories I'd never heard about her own mother, about my mother's childhood, about family history that helped pieces of the puzzle fall into place. Patricia was always sensitive to perceived slights, Dorothy recalled. Even as a small child, she would create elaborate tales about how her sisters were against her. I tried to help her see things more objectively, but she shook her head sadly. Some patterns established themselves early. After lunch, we returned to Dorothy's home where I presented her with the restored photographs, now beautifully framed. Her eyes welled with tears as she examined each one. "Oh, Audrey," she whispered. "These moments. I'd almost forgotten how happy those days were, before everything became so complicated." We spent the afternoon looking through her old albums, with Dorothy providing context and stories for images I'd never seen. It felt like recovering a lost branch of my family tree, connection to maternal lineage that wasn't filtered through my mother's distorted lens. Before leaving, I took a selfie of us together, Dorothy's smile radiant beside mine. With her permission, I posted it to social media with the caption, "Blessed to spend Mother's Day celebrating the matriarch who taught me what unconditional love looks like, 4 generations strong." It wasn't intended as a provocation, but rather an authentic expression of gratitude for the genuine maternal connection I'd experienced that day. Nevertheless, I knew it would likely trigger the next phase of family backlash. I was right. The response was swift and furious. By the time I returned home and turned my phone back on Sunday evening, I had 17 missed calls, 29 text messages, and a voicemail inbox at capacity. The majority were from my mother, each message escalating in both volume and vitriol. The first few texts maintained the pretense of concern, "Where are you?" and "We're worried about you." By midday, they had shifted to accusation. "How dare you manipulate your grandmother like this?" The final messages abandoned all subtlety. "You've always been jealous of your siblings' relationship with me. This pathetic attention grab proves how unstable you really are." The voicemails followed a similar trajectory, with my mother's voice becoming increasingly strident. The last one, time-stamped 4:37 p.m., was particularly revealing. "You think you've stolen Mother's Day from me? Dorothy is my mother, not yours. You had no right to take her today when you've barely visited her in months. Everyone can see this vindictive little stunt for what it is." I saved each message to my documentation folder without responding. Dr. Barnes had advised creating a buffer period before engaging with family communications, allowing the initial emotional reaction to pass and enabling a more measured response. The text from Heather was predictably accusatory. "Mom's devastated. She cried through most of brunch. Hope your little revenge plot was worth it." Kyle's message was briefer but equally pointed. "Low blow, sis. Using Grandma to get back at Mom? That's cold, even for you." My father, true to form, attempted to mediate from a position of willful ignorance. "Your mother is very upset. I don't know what's going on between you two, but family should come first." Call her and make this right. Not one family member acknowledged the simple truth. My mother had explicitly uninvited me from the family gathering, then become enraged when I made alternative plans instead of sitting home alone. The next morning, I was reviewing client presentations at work when my phone lit up with an unexpected name: James, Heather's husband. We had always been friendly, but never particularly close. "Audrey, do you have a minute to talk?" His voice was low, as if he didn't want to be overheard. "Sure. What's up?" I stepped away from my desk into an empty conference room. "I wanted you to know. Yesterday was awful, but not because of anything you did. Patricia spent the entire brunch complaining about you, sharing personal details that made everyone uncomfortable. Even the kids were asking why Grandma kept saying mean things about Aunt Audrey. I'm sorry you all had to deal with that," I said, genuinely meaning it. "Don't apologize," James said firmly. "Heather's upset with you right now, but honestly, I think she's jealous. You found a way out of the cycle while she's still trapped in it." Yesterday, after Patricia criticized her outfit, her parenting, and her contribution to brunch, Heather had a meltdown in the car on the way home. This glimpse behind the curtain of the perfect family gathering was illuminating. While I'd imagined everyone happily united against the absent scapegoat, the reality was that without me there to absorb the negative energy, it had simply redirected to the next available target: Heather. "Thanks for telling me this, James. It means a lot. Just be patient with Heather. She's not ready to see the pattern yet." The conversation with James was validating, but it couldn't prepare me for what happened next. 2 days after Mother's Day, I was deep in work mode when Lisa, my boss, appeared at my desk with a concerned expression. "Audrey, there's someone asking for you in reception. She seems agitated." Security called up. A cold dread washed over me. "Is it an older woman? Early 60s, highlighted blonde hair?" Lisa nodded. "She says she's your mother and it's an emergency. Should I tell them to send her up, or—" "Absolutely not," I said firmly, surprising myself with how quickly the boundary formed. "There's no emergency. She's trying to create a scene because she's angry with me." Lisa's expression shifted from concern to understanding. "I'll have security explain she needs to make an appointment. Do you want to step out the back way in case this gets uncomfortable?" "No," I decided after a moment's thought. "I'll go down and speak with her briefly, but in the lobby with security present. I don't want this to escalate to the point where she's showing up at my apartment next." The elevator ride to the lobby felt interminable. I used the time to center myself, remembering Dr. Barnes' advice about maintaining calm in the face of emotional manipulation. My mother was pacing near the reception desk, dressed immaculately, as always in a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. When she spotted me, her expression twisted from impatience to a strange combination of fury and satisfaction at having successfully demanded my attention. "Audrey, finally! We need to talk about your behavior." "Mom, this is my workplace," I said quietly. "This isn't appropriate. What's not appropriate is turning my own mother against me on Mother's Day." Her voice rose, drawing glances from people in the lobby. "I didn't turn anyone against you. Grandma is allowed to spend time with whomever she chooses." After filling her head with lies about me, Patricia's volume increased further. "Just like you've been spreading vicious rumors about addiction problems to explain why you weren't at brunch." The irony was so profound, I almost laughed. "Mom, you're the one who told the family I have addiction problems." I've simply corrected the record when asked directly. "How dare you accuse me of lying?" She stepped toward me aggressively, causing the security guard to move closer. "I think you should leave now," I said calmly. "We can discuss this another time in a more appropriate setting." "We'll discuss it now." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "You ungrateful, manipulative." The security guard intervened smoothly, placing himself between us. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave the premises immediately." What followed was both mortifying and illuminating. My mother, the paragon of suburban respectability, began screaming about her rights as a parent, about my alleged mental problems, about family loyalty. As security escorted her to the door, she shouted over her shoulder, "This is why no one in the family can stand you, Audrey. This attention-seeking behavior has always been your problem. The lobby had gone silent, every eye on the unfolding drama. My face burned with humiliation, but beneath it was a strange sense of validation. Everyone had just witnessed the treatment I'd experienced behind closed doors my entire life. Lisa appeared at my side, gently guiding me toward the elevator. "Take the rest of the day, Audrey. That was intense." "I'm so sorry," I began, but she cut me off. "Don't apologize for someone else's behavior. That wasn't your fault." Back at my apartment, I called Dr. Barnes and was grateful to get an emergency appointment that afternoon. In her office, I recounted the workplace confrontation, still shaking slightly at the memory. She showed up at my job, made a scene in front of my colleagues and clients. "I've never been so humiliated." "What your mother did today was inappropriate and concerning," Dr. Barnes acknowledged. "But I'd like you to consider a different perspective on what happened." "What perspective could possibly make this okay?" "Not okay. Nothing about this is okay," she clarified. "But significant. Your mother's public behavior today revealed the truth that you've been trying to explain to people for months. She showed her true colors not just to you, but to objective witnesses. I considered this. My boss was amazing, actually. She didn't question my version of events or suggest I must have done something to provoke the situation. Because she saw the reality with her own eyes, Dr. Barnes nodded. Your mother's attempt to control and humiliate you backfired by revealing her own instability. The realization was oddly freeing. For years, I had feared being disbelieved if I ever spoke openly about my mother's treatment. Today had proven those fears unfounded. When people witnessed her behavior directly, they recognized it as inappropriate and concerning. "So, what happens now?" I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted. "That depends on what you want to happen," Dr. Barnes replied. "Your mother's escalation suggests she's feeling a loss of control as you establish boundaries. This often leads to what we call an extinction burst, an intensification of manipulative behaviors before potentially subsiding." "You mean it might get worse before it gets better?" "Possibly. Which is why strengthening your support system and maintaining clear boundaries is so important right now." That evening, my father called to inform me that the family wanted a meeting to resolve the situation. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request, but an expectation. "Your mother is very upset about what happened today," he began. "I imagine she is," I replied. Being escorted out by security must have been embarrassing for her. "Audrey," he sighed, "this situation has gotten out of hand. We need to sit down as a family and clear the air. Your mother is willing to forgive your behavior if you'll just—" "Forgive my behavior," I interrupted, incredulous. "Dad, she showed up at my workplace, caused a scene, grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises, and had to be removed by security. What behavior of mine needs forgiving exactly? You know how your mother gets when she's upset. If you hadn't provoked her by spending Mother's Day with your grandmother instead—" "Stop," I said firmly. "I wasn't uninvited for Mother's Day. I spent the day with my grandmother because I was explicitly told not to come to brunch. Mom then tried to sabotage those plans, and when that failed, she showed up at my workplace to create a scene. Those are facts, not interpretations." There was a long silence before my father spoke again, his voice tired. "We need to find a way forward as a family, Audrey. Your mother has agreed to a meeting this Saturday at our house. Heather and Kyle will be there too." I considered refusing but realized this confrontation was inevitable. Perhaps having everyone present would actually be beneficial. No more one-sided stories, no more flying monkeys carrying distorted messages. Fine, I agreed. But I'll be bringing printed copies of the original Mother's Day text message and other documentation. If we're going to clear the air, let's start with acknowledging what actually happened. After hanging up, I felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. The family meeting would likely be difficult, possibly even traumatic. But for the first time in my life, I was walking into a confrontation with my mother armed with truth, support, and the confidence that came from finally seeing the dynamic clearly. Whatever happened on Saturday, I would no longer be the confused child desperately seeking approval and accepting blame for things I hadn't done. I would be an adult standing in my truth, regardless of whether my family chose to see it. Saturday arrived with a weight of inevitability. I'd prepared meticulously for the family meeting, both practically and emotionally. Dr. Barnes had helped me develop strategies for maintaining boundaries during what would likely be an emotionally charged confrontation. I'd also assembled a folder containing printed evidence of my mother's behavior, including the original Mother's Day text, screenshots of her contradictory messages to others, and photos of the bruises on my arm from her workplace grab. The drive to my parents' suburban home felt surreal. How many times had I made this journey with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, desperately hoping this visit would be different? That this time I might finally earn the approval that had always been just out of reach? Today was different. I wasn't seeking approval or even reconciliation. I was simply standing in my truth. Whatever the consequences, I pulled into the driveway precisely at the agreed-upon time of 2 o'clock, noting that both Heather's SUV and Kyle's sedan were already there. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my folder and approached the front door of the house where I'd grown up but had never truly felt at home. My father answered on the first knock, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Audrey. Good, you're here." Everyone's in the living room. The tension in the air was palpable as I entered. My mother sat rigidly in her favorite armchair, positioned slightly higher than the surrounding seating as if on a throne. Heather perched on the edge of the sofa beside Kyle, both avoiding eye contact with me. The tableau was so familiar, it was almost comical. The family arranged around Patricia, awaiting her direction. "Let's get this over with," my mother said by way of greeting. "I've agreed to this meeting because your father thinks it will help resolve your issues, Audrey." "My issues?" I repeated calmly, taking the single chair opposite her rather than squeezing onto the sofa with my siblings. "Your recent behavior has been concerning to the entire family," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "The attention-seeking, the manipulation of your grandmother, the dramatic scene you caused at your workplace. I think we should start by establishing some facts," I interrupted, opening my folder. "I have copies for every one of the original text message that started this situation." I distributed the printed screenshots showing the group text where my mother had explicitly uninvited me from Mother's Day. My father looked uncomfortable as he read it, while Heather and Kyle exchanged glances. "This message makes it clear that I was told not to attend the family Mother's Day brunch," I said evenly. "I didn't choose to exclude myself. I was explicitly uninvited." "You're taking that completely out of context," my mother huffed. "It was obviously a moment of frustration, not meant to be taken literally." "What was the correct context or interpretation then?" I asked. "You know perfectly well that you'd been distant and difficult for weeks before that text. I was simply responding to your behavior." I pulled out the next document, a timeline of our communications in the months preceding the text, showing minimal interaction, all of it initiated by me, and met with brief, dismissive responses from her. "There's no evidence of me being distant and difficult in our actual communications," I pointed out. "In fact, I was the one consistently reaching out and receiving minimal response." "This is ridiculous," Patricia snapped. "Are we really going to sit here while Audrey presents her little PowerPoint of grievances?" "I think we should hear what Audrey has to say," my father said surprisingly, earning a glare from my mother. Taking his unexpected support as permission to continue, I methodically worked through the evidence. The contradictory stories my mother had told about why I wasn't at Mother's Day, her attempt to sabotage my plans with my grandmother, and finally, the workplace incident, including photos of the bruises her grip had left on my arm. "Jesus, Mom," Kyle muttered when he saw the bruise photos. "You did that?" "She's obviously exaggerating," Patricia dismissed. "Audrey has always bruised easily. Remember when she tried to claim your father had grabbed her too hard when she was 16? The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had indeed shown my mother bruises on my arm, after my father had grabbed me during an argument. She had accused me of exaggerating then, too, and the incident had been buried, never to be discussed again." "I remember," I said quietly. "I also remember being told I was too sensitive, that I was making things up for attention, that I was misinterpreting events. That's been the pattern my entire life, hasn't it? When the treatment I receive hurts me, I'm told the problem is my perception, not the treatment itself." My mother's expression hardened. "The problem, Audrey, has always been your insistence on playing the victim when things don't go your way. Your sister and brother managed to maintain loving relationships with this family without all this drama. Because they accept the roles you've assigned them, I replied. Heather is the good daughter who never challenges you, even when you criticize and undermine her. Kyle is the baby who's protected from consequences and responsibility. And I'm the scapegoat who carries the blame for any family tension. That's absurd psychobabble, Patricia scoffed. You've clearly been seeing some therapist who's filling your head with this nonsense about family roles and scapegoats. Is it nonsense, though? I turned to Kyle. When was the last time Mom criticized you publicly the way she does me? When have you ever been excluded from a family gathering? Then to Heather. When have you ever stood up to Mom when she's being unfair, even though you've privately admitted to me that she is? Kyle looked down, uncomfortable with direct confrontation. But surprisingly, it was Heather who broke first. It's not that simple, Audrey, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You don't understand what it's like. What's like? I pressed gently. Being around Mom when she's disappointed in you. Heather's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It's easier to just go along with what she wants. Heather! My mother exclaimed, clearly shocked by this mini rebellion. An unexpected crack in Heather's perfect daughter facade appeared as tears filled her eyes. At Mother's Day brunch, after Audrey didn't come, you spent the entire time criticizing my dress, my kids' behavior, the scones I brought. Nothing I did was good enough. That's not true, Patricia insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. It is true, Kyle said suddenly, finding his voice. You were on a rampage. Even Dad noticed. All eyes turned to my father, who looked distinctly uncomfortable being put on the spot. There was tension at brunch. He admitted reluctantly. For a moment, no one spoke. The family script had been disrupted. The carefully maintained facade was cracking, allowing glimpses of the painful reality beneath. This is exactly the kind of division Audrey has always tried to create in this family, my mother finally said, her voice cold, turning everyone against each other. Against me. No, Mom, I said quietly. I've never wanted division. I've only wanted honest relationships based on reality, not performance and fear. Reality? She laughed bitterly. Your version of reality where you're always the innocent victim and I'm some kind of monster? Not a monster, I corrected. A human being with flaws, like all of us. The difference is that your flaws have been protected by a family system that requires absolute loyalty and forbids criticism. After everything I've done for you, Patricia's voice rose dramatically. The sacrifices I've made as a mother. What sacrifices specifically? I interrupted, keeping my tone neutral. I'd like to understand what sacrifices you feel you've made for me that haven't been acknowledged. The directness of the question seemed to throw her. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally managed. I've always tried to love you, but you make it so difficult. The statement hung in the air, revelatory in its conditional framing. I've tried to love you. As if love were an effort she had to make for me specifically, unlike her natural love for my siblings. I don't need you to try to love me anymore, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. I love myself enough now. The silence that followed was profound. My mother stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps she was. The Audrey who would have crumbled under her disapproval, who would have apologized for things she hadn't done just to keep the peace. That version of me no longer existed. I think, my father finally said, clearing his throat awkwardly, we all need some time to process this conversation. It was a classic Richard move, postponing resolution when emotions ran high. But this time, I didn't mind. I'd said what I needed to say, presented the evidence I'd gathered, and most importantly, remained true to myself throughout. I agree, I said, standing and gathering my folder. Thank you all for listening. I hope this can be the beginning of more honest family relationships, but that will require everyone's willingness to acknowledge reality, even when it's uncomfortable. My mother remained seated, her expression unreadable, as I walked to the door. Heather followed me, catching up in the hallway. Audrey, wait. Her voice was uncertain. What you said about roles in the family. I've never thought about it that way. But it's okay, I assured her. You don't have to figure everything out today, just pay attention to the patterns. They're easier to see once you know they're there. She nodded, looking both confused and somehow relieved, as if a burden she'd carried unconsciously had been named, and therefore lightened. I drove home in a state of emotional exhaustion but also profound calm. I had spoken my truth without being baited into reactive anger or tearful defensiveness. For the first time in my life, I had faced my mother's disapproval without it destroying me. Hours later, a text arrived from an unexpected source. Kyle. It was brief but significant. You were right about everything. Can we talk sometime? A small step perhaps, but a meaningful one. The family system was shifting. Equilibrium disrupted by truth. What would emerge from that disruption remained to be seen. 6 months after the family confrontation, I stood in my newly redecorated apartment, admiring the transformation. Gone were the muted, inoffensive colors I'd chosen to avoid potential criticism. In their place, vibrant art, some purchased, some created by my own hand, adorned walls painted in colors that made my spirit sing. The space finally reflected who I truly was, rather than who I thought I should be. The physical changes mirrored the internal ones. Weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Barnes had helped me process decades of family dynamics, identifying patterns of thought and behavior that had originated as survival mechanisms but no longer served me. I'd learned to recognize when self-doubt was actually my mother's critical voice internalized. And gradually, that voice had grown fainter. My relationship with my immediate family had evolved in ways both expected and surprising. Contact with my mother remained minimal, a boundary I'd established after she'd refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing despite multiple opportunities. Our interactions were now limited to occasional group texts about logistical matters and carefully managed appearances at major family events. You can have a relationship with someone while still maintaining protective boundaries, Dr. Barnes had advised. Think of it as emotional PPE. You can be in the same room without exposing yourself to toxicity. Heather and I had reached an unexpected détente. After the confrontation, she had retreated into defensive loyalty to our mother for several weeks. Then, following what she described as a particularly brutal criticism session from Patricia, she had called me in tears. How do you do it? She'd asked. How do you not let it destroy you when she talks to you that way? That conversation had been the beginning of a more authentic relationship between us. Heather wasn't ready to fully acknowledge the dysfunctional family patterns. Too much of her identity was wrapped up in being the good daughter, but she had started recognizing when she was being manipulated and had begun setting small boundaries of her own. Kyle had surprised everyone by starting his own therapy journey. Our conversations had grown increasingly honest as he processed his role as the family baby and the ways it had both privileged and limited him. I never realized how much being mom's favorite was actually a cage. He admitted during one of our newly established monthly coffee meetings. Everything I got came with strings attached. My father remained caught in the middle, unwilling to directly challenge my mother but making tentative efforts to connect with me one-on-one. We'd established a tradition of lunch every few weeks at a quiet restaurant midway between our homes. During these meetings, he never mentioned my mother, focusing instead on safe topics like my work or his retirement plans. It was limited but represented progress from his previous role as my mother's message courier. The most profound change had been in my relationship with my grandmother Dorothy. Our Mother's Day connection had blossomed into a deep bond, with weekly visits that had become the highlight of both our calendars. Dorothy had gradually shared more family history, helping me understand the generational patterns that had shaped my mother's behavior. Patricia was always terribly afraid of being abandoned, Dorothy had explained during one particularly revealing conversation. Her father, your grandfather, was a distant man who withheld affection as punishment. I tried to compensate, perhaps too much. I see now how that may have contributed to her need for constant validation and control. Understanding my mother's wounds didn't excuse her behavior but provided context that helped me release some of my own anger. Patricia was a product of her own upbringing, just as I had been of mine. The difference was that I had chosen to break the cycle while she remained caught in it. Patricia's refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing had been painful but not surprising. Some people simply cannot tolerate the vulnerability required for genuine accountability, Dr. Barnes had explained. It threatens their entire sense of self. I had finally accepted that my mother might never change, might never be capable of the maternal relationship I had longed for. That acceptance, rather than being a defeat, had been liberating. I could stop pouring energy into a well that would never fill and instead nurture connections with people capable of mutual respect and authentic love. My professional life had flourished alongside my personal growth. The confidence that came from setting boundaries and trusting my perceptions had translated into taking more creative risks and speaking up more in meetings. 6 months after the workplace incident, I had been promoted to creative director, overseeing a team of designers and having final say on major projects. My social circle had expanded as well. Without the constant drain of family drama and maternal approval seeking, I had energy to nurture new friendships and deepen existing ones. I'd even started dating again after a long hiatus, meeting Thomas, a kind and thoughtful architect who respected boundaries and communicated clearly, qualities I now recognized as essential rather than optional. Mother's Day came around again, marking a full year since the text message that had catalyzed so much change. This time, instead of anxiety about family obligations, I organized a maternal energy brunch, celebrating the nurturing figures in my life regardless of biological connection. Dorothy attended as guest of honor, along with Lisa, my boss-turned-mentor, Rachel, my steadfast friend, and several other women who had provided guidance and support throughout my journey. During the brunch, I gave a toast to all the women who show us that maternal love comes in many forms, through mentorship, friendship, guidance, and unconditional acceptance. Thank you for helping me understand that family is about how people treat each other, not just shared DNA. The day after the brunch, I had my final regular therapy session with Dr. Barnes. We had agreed to transition to monthly check-ins, with the understanding that I could schedule additional sessions if needed. "How do you feel about this transition?" she asked, as we settled into our familiar chairs. "Ready?" I said confidently. A year ago, I couldn't imagine functioning without the weekly anchor of these sessions. Now I have internal resources and external support that can sustain me. "You've done remarkable work, Audrey," Dr. Barnes acknowledged. "Not everyone is willing to look so honestly at painful family patterns." "I couldn't have done it without proper guidance," I smiled. "You never told me what to think or how to feel. You just helped me trust my own perceptions." Before leaving her office, I shared something I'd been working on privately, a letter to my younger self that I had no intention of sending to anyone. Writing it had been a powerful exercise in self-compassion. "Dear little Audrey," it began, "you aren't too sensitive, you aren't too dramatic, you aren't too anything. The criticism you internalized was never about your worth, but about others' limitations. The love you sought was never something you needed to earn through perfection. It was always your birthright, even if those who should have given it freely were unable to do so. The path ahead won't be easy, but I promise you this. One day, you will look in the mirror and see someone worthy of unconditional love, your own." As I placed the letter back in my bag, Dr. Barnes asked one final question for our regular sessions. "What would you say is the most important thing you've learned throughout this process?" I considered carefully before answering. The greatest gift I gave myself wasn't standing up to my mother, it was finally understanding that her inability to love me properly was never my failure. The well-behaved daughter she wanted was a role I was never meant to play. And now, I'm free to be exactly who I am. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and self-discovery. If my story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone in family struggles. Hit subscribe to hear more authentic stories about overcoming family trauma, and leave a comment about your own experiences with setting boundaries. Remember, your worth isn't determined by those who couldn't see it clearly. Like and subscribe for more stories of healing and growth.